Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get you, well, properly informed on the stories that really matter.
That's the goal.
And today, we're diving into a Canadian political comeback story. But it's anything but simple.
Yeah.
Think about this. A recent by-election out in Alberta, a very familiar face back in the winner's circle, but underneath all that, a surprising amount of drama. Some really unique details. Details that tell us quite a bit about where Canadian politics is at right now. Our main focus today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He just won the Battle River Crowfoot by-election. Now, okay, that win itself, maybe not a huge shocker.
Right, it's a very safe seat.
Exactly. But our mission here in this deep dive isn't just about that he won. It's about how it all went down, the truly unique circumstances around this particular vote. And maybe most importantly, what does this win really signal for his political future, for the Conservative Party, and, for the wider Canadian political scene, especially now he's heading back to Parliament to face Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Yeah, exactly. We need to look past just the headline, Poilievre wins by-election. Because this local event, especially with its weird backdrop, connects directly to the national picture. And it really frames the personal journey of a leader facing some pretty significant hurdles, but also opportunities as he gets back into the House of Commons spotlight.
Okay, let's unpack this in Section 1. The unexpected comeback. Pierre Poilievre's path back to Parliament. So to really get why this by-election matters, we need to rewind. Just back to April 2025, the federal general election. Now, Poilievre led the Conservatives to their best national popular vote result since, 1988? A solid 41.3%.
That's a strong showing, nationally speaking.
It really was. But, and this is the key thing, he suffered a major personal defeat. Lost his own seat, Carleton, the Ottawa area riding he'd held for 2 decades.
Yeah, lost it to Liberal Bruce Fanjoy. That was a big moment, a real upset.
Definitely. And his absence from the House of Commons, well, it really limited the official opposition, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. You can do media scrums outside Parliament, sure. But as leader of the opposition not having a seat, it fundamentally weakens your ability to directly challenge the government day in, day out during question period. So getting back into the House wasn't just, nice to have. It was pretty much essential for his leadership, strategically speaking.
Right, an imperative. Okay, so the stage is set for this Battle River Crowfoot by-election. And the setup itself was, let's say, a bit unusual.
You could say that.
The sitting Conservative MP, Damien Couric, who, by the way, had just won the riding in April with almost 83% of the vote he voluntarily stepped aside in June, just paved the way for Poilievre to run.
And Battle River Crowfoot, it's classic Conservative heartland. Huge geographically, mostly agricultural, and historically incredibly safe. Candidates there usually pull in 70% easily. Couric's 82.8% was, pretty standard for the riding, even impressive.
Yeah, a real stronghold. And Poilievre's campaign approach there was interesting, too. He said he canvassed like he was one vote behind.
Despite it being so safe.
Right. He talked a lot about humility and earning people's trust. He was out there going to rodeos, visiting local businesses, meeting folks, really putting in the face time, even though, the outcome wasn't really in doubt.
And the results came in. He won, obviously. Got 80.4% of the vote.
A landslide, basically.
Absolutely. But there's a little detail worth noting that 80.4%, while massive, was actually a slight dip compared to Couric's 82.8% just a few months earlier in the general election.
Oh, interesting. Not a huge drop, but...
Not huge at all, no. But in such a safe seat, any downward tick gets noticed. Some observers pointed to it, maybe wondering about voter fatigue or just, minor resistance even there.
So what's the immediate takeaway from all this? The big one is Poilievre's back. He's set to return to the House of Commons on September 15th.
And that means?
It means, for the first time, he can go head-to-head with Prime Minister Mark Carney during question period. His direct, often pretty aggressive style is coming back to the parliamentary floor.
That's definitely the immediate impact everyone's watching for, that direct confrontation. But I do wonder, is just being back enough to change the bigger story around his leadership?
What do you mean?
Well, given those tough national poll numbers we're going to talk about later, does he need more than just showing up in the House? Does he need to actually shift how he engages now that he's back? Or will the return itself be enough momentum? It's a key question, I think.
That's a really good point. Okay, hold that thought. Because this by-election itself had another layer entirely. This is where it gets, almost bizarre.
Ah, yes. Section 2. An election like no other, the longest ballot and the other challengers. This Battle River Crowfoot by-election, it literally made Canadian history.
Oh, so.
A record number of candidates. 214 on one ballot.
214. Can you even picture that? Trying to find a name?
Seriously, it's like a phone book, not a ballot. The largest number ever in any federal election in Canada. Just wild.
And this wasn't just random. There was a group behind this, right? The Longest Ballot Committee. Exactly. They're a protest group. Their main goal. Pushing for electoral reform. Protesting Canada's first past-the-post system. They argue it doesn't really reflect how people vote.
And they've done this before, haven't they? Flooded specific ridings?
Yeah, they have a track record. They actually targeted Poilievre's old riding, Carleton, before as well. It's their tactic to draw attention.
So how did Elections Canada even handle this? 214 names.
Well, it created huge practical problems. For the first time ever in a federal election, they had to use special write-in ballots.
Write-in. So voters had to actually write the name down.
Yep. You had to manually write your chosen candidate's name. Now, they did have full lists available at the polling stations, so you could look it up. But yeah, write in.
Wow.
And obviously, counting those took way longer. They had to hire extra staff just to manage the count. Elections Canada said it went smoothly, all things considered, but it was definitely a major logistical hurdle.
I can imagine.
Now, amidst this sea of names, an independent candidate actually came in second. Bonnie Critchley, a retired Army veteran.
Okay, how did she do?
She got 9.9% of the vote. That's just over 5,000 votes, which, interestingly, was more than double the Liberal candidate, Darcy Spady, who got 4.3%.
An independent beating the Liberal in second place.
Yeah. And Critchley was very outspoken against the by-election itself. She called it another man's ego project, referring to Poilievre, obviously, and pointed out it cost taxpayers $2 million right after people had already voted for Kouric in April.
That's a criticism you could see resonating with some people locally, that sense of, why are we doing this again so soon?
Definitely. Now, what about the impact of the Longest Ballot Committee itself? All those candidates, did it work?
Well, they certainly got attention. Headlines, procedural changes at Elections Canada, you can't deny that. But in terms of actual votes, it was tiny. All their candidates combined pulled in maybe around 300 votes total. That's like, what, 0.6% of all the ballots cast?
Wow, almost nothing.
Yeah, and apparently 70 or 75 of their candidates got 0 votes. So did their strategy work? It highlighted their cause, maybe, but it didn't seem to translate into any real support. Some might argue it just looked like, well, a stunt that alienated people.
Poilievre certainly wasn't impressed. He called the whole thing a scam.
Strong words.
And he's pledged to bring in legislation to make these kinds of protests harder to pull off. Things like maybe requiring more signatures to get nominated or limiting how many candidates one official agent can represent.
And it's not just him, right? Elections Canada's own chief electoral officer, Stéphane Perreault, has raised concerns too. He suggested changes like maybe penalties if someone signs nomination papers for multiple candidates in the same race. Seems like there's momentum for rule changes.
Yeah, it feels like something's got to give there. It also seems worth mentioning briefly the separatist element in the riding.
Right. Alberta separatism has deep roots in that part of the province.
There were candidates openly talking about it. Grant Abraham from the United Party of Canada, for instance, he got about 773 votes. So the sentiment is there. It was part of the conversation.
But it didn't really change the overall outcome, did it?
No, not significantly in this race. The big story really remained Poilievre's win and, well, that incredibly long ballot.
A sheer number of names, yeah.
Okay, so he's won the by-election, navigated this weird ballot situation. Now what? Section 3, the road ahead, challenges and opportunities for Poilievre.
And this is crucial, because winning the by-election was step 1, but now comes the hard part.
First up, there's a mandatory leadership review coming, January 2026 at the Conservative National Convention.
Standard procedure after losing a general election, it's in their party constitution.
Right. So how does this by-election win play into that review? Does it give him a big boost?
Well, that's the interesting question. Political analysts, folks like Dwayne Bratt and David Stewart, they're suggesting the impact might be only marginally positive.
Marginally. After an 80% win.
Yeah, because the thinking is party members deciding on his leadership are probably way more focused on the April federal election loss, especially how they lost after having a lead, than they are on him winning a by-election in one of the safest conservative seats in the country. The by-election was seen as necessary. Sure, a box he had to tick to get back into Parliament, but it doesn't erase the memory of the general election disappointment for many members.
Okay, that makes sense. So the review is still a potential hurdle.
Yeah.
And let's connect this to the bigger picture, the national mood. The polling data right now. It paints a pretty challenging picture for Poilievre and the Conservatives.
It really does. Nanos research, for instance, shows the Liberals leading nationally, 44% to the Conservatives, 33%. That's a significant gap.
And what about preferred prime minister?
Even more stark. Prime Minister Mark Carney is sitting above 50% at preferred PM. Poilievre is down around 23.7%. That's more than a 2-to-1 margin. Really tough numbers for an opposition leader.
Wow. And there's more, right? Angus Reid data.
Yeah, Angus Reid digs into his image specifically, and it highlights what some people are calling an image problem. 52% of Canadians find him insincere. And 50%, half the country, say they'd be ashamed to call him prime minister. And that number has actually gone up 10 points since 2023.
That's quite a finding.
It is. And nearly half of all Canadians, 48%, and even a majority of women, 53%, feel the Conservative Party does not represent people like them. This disconnect seems particularly bad in Ontario, a key battleground where the Conservatives are trailing the Liberals by over 20 points.
Those are some serious headwinds. But there's a counterpoint here, maybe something that helps him within the party for that leadership review.
Possibly, yes. When Conservative voters themselves are asked who they blame for the April election loss, they don't primarily point the finger at Poilievre.
Who do they blame?
Well, according to polls, 39% blame former U.S. President Donald Trump, maybe for negatively impacting the Conservative brand globally. Another 22% blame Prime Minister Mark Carney, perhaps for running a better campaign. Only 14% blame Poilievre himself.
Interesting. So internally, he might have more insulation than the national numbers suggest?
It could definitely help him shore up support among the party faithful heading into that review, yeah. They might see external factors, not his leadership, as the main issue.
So the big question then becomes, how does Poilievre adapt his strategy now? He's back in the House, facing these pressures, internal and external. What's the plan?
Well, he's laid out his priorities pretty clearly for when Parliament returns. He's talking about tackling inflation, calling it out-of-control crime, immigration issues, and, of course, the cost of living and housing prices.
Core conservative issues, cost of living pressures that are definitely biting for many Canadians.
Absolutely. He's also proposed something called a Canadian Sovereignty Act. The idea there is to speed up major projects like pipelines by potentially overriding certain federal hurdles.
Okay, pushing on the economic and resource fronts. And what about trade? That's been a hot topic.
Huge. He's been relentlessly critical of Prime Minister Carney's handling of trade disputes, particularly the tariffs with both the U.S. and China. He often brings up China's massive 75.8% tariff on Canadian canola as, exhibit A of government failure.
And Carney just recently made a move on the U.S. front, didn't he? Removing some tariffs.
That's right. Carney announced the removal of some retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods that comply with the CUSMA trade deal. That's the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement.
And Poilievre's reaction.
Predictably critical. He framed it immediately as another capitulation by Carney. So the aggressive stance on trade isn't changing.
Right. Which brings us back to something you raised earlier, is communication style.
Exactly. There's this tension, isn't there, between his often punchy, very aggressive tone, especially online and in scrums, and what many political analysts see as a need to, evolve. To appeal beyond his core base. To present the Conservatives not just as critics, but as a credible, stable government in waiting. One that has real solutions, not just sharp attacks.
So less bombast, more substance. Or maybe a different kind of substance.
Perhaps. It's also about showing voters he's not just, as some critics label him, a Canadian-style Trump. Building some kind of positive connection or affinity with voters that's separate from just their dislike of Carney or the Liberals.
That's a fascinating challenge. Can he maintain that edge that clearly energizes his base while also softening enough or maybe shifting his focus enough to win over those undecided, maybe more centrist voters, especially women, and people in Ontario where the numbers are weak?
That's the tightrope, precisely. Can he project competence and temperament, the qualities people look for in a prime minister, while still being the effective, aggressive opposition leader his base wants? It's a very different communication task than just firing up the party faithful.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What does this all mean for you listening at home?
Well, first off, Pierre Poilievre being back in Parliament is significant. You're going to hear a strong, very direct opposition voice back on the federal stage.
Especially on the economy, right?
Oh.
Inflation, cost of living, trade. Expect him to hammer those points hard in question, period. He'll be a very visible presence.
No doubt. And his by-election win, even if it was expected in that writing, was absolutely critical for him to be able to lead effectively from within the House. That hurdle is cleared, but, and it's a big but, that win doesn't just wipe away the broader challenges that we talked about, those national poll numbers, the public perception issues, particularly around sincerity and representation. Those are still very real.
So the next few months are really key.
Absolutely crucial. Parliament's back. That leadership review is on the horizon in January. It's going to be a major test for him. Can he start to bridge that gap between his solid base and the wider Canadian electorate he needs to convince?
Which leads us to our final thought for you to consider. What will Poilievre prioritize now? Will the focus be on, say, softening his image, broadening his appeal, trying to win over those skeptical voters?
Or will he double down on energizing the base that clearly responds to his current style, hoping that's enough or that circumstances change?
And how will that strategic choice, because it is a choice ultimately shape not just his own future, but the whole national conversation and the direction of Canadian politics under Prime Minister Carney?
Lots to watch.
Definitely. The deep dive continues as always. We encourage you to stay informed, keep asking critical questions, and follow these narratives as they unfold.